Inspired by the Bible Experience.
Shalom, and bless the Comforter, the Yahshua HaMashiach. Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. What advantage then hath YAHUDAH? Or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed oracles of Elohim. For what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of Elohim without effect? Elohim forbid. Yea, let Yahweh be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when thou art judged. Shalom. Bless the Comforter, the Yahshua HaMashiach.
Shalom. Bless the Comforter through Yahshua.
Shalom.
Welcome to the Sons of Promise, House of Yehudah program. And on behalf of the saints, I'd like to thank you for joining us. My name is Gehazi ben Yehudah Israel, and I'll be your host for the Sons of Promise, House of Yehudah program. The topic of our program this week is the resurrection of the dry bones in the valley. And here to discuss this with me today is my brother Enos ben Yehudah Israel. Shalom. My brother Eleazar ben Yehudah Israel.
Shalom.
Welcome to the discussion, my brothers. According to the word of Yahweh, the house of Judah is the governing authority in Yahshua's holy body and in his glorious kingdom. Reference Genesis chapter 49, verses 6 through 8, John chapter 4, verse 22, Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, Zechariah chapter 10, verses 3 and 4, and also chapter 12, verses 4 through 7, and Psalm chapter 60, verse 7. If you can't accept what Yahweh's word says, as it is written, then what else can't you accept? We at the Sanctioned body of the Culture Center of the New Covenant Congregation of Israel, the standard bearers, the sons of promise, are from the house of Judah. Reference Isaiah chapter 62, verses 10 through 12, Romans chapter 8, and also Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. Because we show that glory and honor is to Judah first, reference Romans chapter 2, verse 10, and because we magnify the distinction between the house of Judah and the house of Israel that is written in the scriptures, reference 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 16 through 24, and 2 Samuel chapter 19, verse 41, through chapter 20 and verse 2. We have been accused of being divisive by the spirit of the adversary, reference Revelation chapter 12, verse 10. But it is Yahweh that made the distinction between the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Maybe you should read Jeremiah chapter 3, where Yahweh clearly divorces the house of Israel, and also read John chapter 4, verse 22, where Yahshua, the king of Judah, said, salvation is of or from Judah. We are warning you because if you think Judah is Israel, or if you think you can substitute one for the other, Israel for Judah, in John 4 and 22, you have a very serious problem. This is why in Matthew chapter 10, verse 6, and also in chapter 15, verse 24, Yahshua, the king of Judah, said, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and that I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Because it is the house of Judah that has been given the responsibility to bring salvation to the house of Israel and the nations. So in this program, we're going to continue to show you Yahweh's love for the house of Israel and for the children of Israel, which are all 12 tribes.
Isaiah chapter 11 verse 13 states, the envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. This is a prophecy that has not come to pass yet. As of right now, Ephraim is envious or jealous of the house of Judah, and the house of Judah vexes the house of Israel. But why? Is this something new, or has it been this way for some time? According to the book of Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. This has been an issue since the time of King David. But why? Because Judah is the ruling tribe of the children of Israel, and because the house of Judah is the seed that Yahweh chose to bring salvation unto mankind. Let's go to Genesis 49 verses 8 through 10 and see the role Yahweh gave to Judah. Genesis chapter 49 verse 8 through 10 states, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thy enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So, it is the role that Yahweh gave the house of Judah that causes Ephraim to be envious. Even throughout the Holy Scroll or the Holy Bible, the prophets stated the importance of Judah in Yahweh's eyes. Isaiah chapter 62 verse 1 states, for Zion or Judah's sake will I not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not rest until the righteousness thereof go forth as brightness, and the salvation thereof as a lamp that burns. Psalms chapter 60 verse 7 states, Gilead is mine, and Manasseh is mine. Ephraim is the strength of my head. Judah is my lawgiver. This is why the prophet said in Zechariah chapter 12 verse 7, which states, Yahweh also shall say the tents of Judah first, or the house of Yehudah, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah.
Our beloved brother Saul also testified of the importance of the house of Judah in Romans chapter 3, verse 1 to 2, saying, "What advantage then has the house of Judah, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of Israel. Therefore, the house of Israel, being a nation, will also have to grab on to the skirt tail of he that is the house of Judah in order to be saved." Reference Revelations chapter 7, verse 14. Let's go and witness how Judah vexes Ephraim and see why Ephraim is jealous of Judah even unto this day. Before we set this up, you can reference 2 Samuel chapters 15 through 20 to get a more in-depth meaning. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 6, it states, "And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of the house of Israel. King David's son Absalom stole the kingdom from him, but not without help. In fact, King David's counselor Ahithophel and the captain of David's army, Joab, betrayed David and helped Absalom to steal the kingdom. So the whole house of Israel was following Absalom. So King David had to flee from Jerusalem for a time. Now let's pick this up after King David's kingdom is restored unto him again, as he began to rule all 12 tribes again.
Now 2 Samuel chapter 19, verses 41 through 43 states, "And behold, all the men of the house of Israel came to the king, and said unto the king, Why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away, and have brought the king and his household and all David's men with him over Jordan? And all the men of Judah answered the men of the house of Israel, Because the king is near of kin to us, wherefore then be you angry for this matter? Have we eaten at all the king's cost, or hath he given of us any gift? And the men of the house of Israel answered the men of Judah, and said, We have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more right in David than you. Why then do you despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of the house of Israel. What you have to understand is the house of Israel is telling the men of Judah they have more right than King David because they represent 10 of the 12 tribes in Israel. But the house of Israel did not have more right in David than Judah. They had some right, but David was king of Judah first, and then he became king over the children of Israel, which includes the house of Israel. So you can see why the men of Judah's words were so fierce, because they were from the same tribe as the king, which is Judah. So for that reason, the men of Judah did not agree with their statement. Now in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verses 1 through 2, it states, And there happened to be there a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And he blew a trumpet, and said, We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O house of Israel. So every man of the house of Israel went up from after David, and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah clave unto their king, from Jordan even to Jerusalem.
Now, this was a shadow of things to come, but in the next passage, we will find out who caused the separation of the house of Israel and the house of Judah. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 16 through 24 states, So when all the house of Israel saw the kings hearken not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the sons of Jesse. To your tents, O house of Israel, now see to thy own house, David. So the house of Israel departed unto their tents. But as for the children of Israel which dwelt in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the tribute, and all the house of Israel stoned him with stones, that he died. Therefore King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. So the house of Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. And it came to pass, when all the house of Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, they sent and called him unto the congregation, and made him king over all the house of Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. And when Rehoboam was come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah, and with the tribe of Benjamin, and 180,000 chosen men, which were warriors, to fight against the house of Israel, to bring the kingdom again to Rehoboam, the son of Shlomo. But the word of Yahweh came unto Shemaiah, the man of Yahweh, saying, Speak unto Rehoboam the son of Solomon, king of Yehudah, and unto all the house of Yehudah and Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people, saying, Thus saith Yahweh, You shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. Return every man to his house, for this thing is from me. They hearken therefore to the word of Yahweh, and return to depart according to the word of Yahweh.
We're now going to break from our discussion and play a selection from our upcoming album, Ingathering for the Davidic Kingdom. And this track is Rock in Jerusalem. Shalom, blessed Comforter, the Yahshua.
Shalom.
Who real people are dressed in white. It's the Israelites with the glory, the service of God. Giving another long promise to the fathers in the flesh. Christ came, who was blessed forever. Amen. Well said. A man dressed in red, he the king of the children that Moses led. On his head, many crown, in his eyes and fire. The wicked tread with his feet tread. In wrath on the warpath to take back the land. On the throne of his father, the rule taker forever. Now who be the children all dressed in purple? That be the house of God. We, his royal servant, giving verbal commands. Girded with truth, governors rule the land. And who's standing there in royal blue? Y'all know who you gotta grab onto. YAHUDAH, such will never depart from Judah. Made back from the root of the tree, planted to feed your earth. The zeal of Yah will perform this. Your will be done when the children comes back from the four corners.
Yahshua HaMashiach, the rock in Jerusalem. Yahshua HaMashiach, calling on Yah. Yahshua HaMashiach, the rock in Jerusalem. Yahshua HaMashiach, calling on Yah.
To the 12 tribes scattered abroad, we say peace. Tribulations come to the nations, they can't flee. House of Israel cursed with blindness they can't see. Romans chapter 11, 27, let it be. House of Judah marching ahead, we take lead. Numbers chapter 10, to the camps on the east. Bold to the nation, cause Satan got them deceived. 10 kings coming together to fake peace. Take on top of trouble, my brothers, just be brave. He that endures to the end shall be saved. For the crown laid up for those that behave. For those that he made, the seed that he raised. According to your numbers of sin, you'll be paid. But don't you wanna go to the land Yah gave? Let Pharaoh go and become the new slave. The stone was rejected, foundation has been laid. Eyes on the prize, our mind on salvation. Prophecies coming to pass, just be patient. Yahweh gave us the promise and we waiting. This is a house of Judah, salvation to all nations.
Yahshua HaMashiach, the rock in Jerusalem. Yahshua HaMashiach, calling on Yah. Yahshua HaMashiach, the rock in Jerusalem. Yahshua HaMashiach, calling on Yah.
We're in Jerusalem, we're in Jerusalem. YAHUDAH better run quick, the nation was split. We're in Jerusalem. Tell them, first and last we're doomed to die. King Yahshua gave us a reason why to lead the Hebrew Israelite. YAHUDAH, we are sanctioned by our Father, He who dwell and I. The eagles in these days and time. We're fighting King Yeshua with the world denied. We're gonna take back the city who terrified. Mighty man of David, the healer of the fairy. Break down idol, restore them history. Seal up altars and burning images. Serve the other God in the land of Israel. It's a time of harvest. Gather the tasers. Put them in a bubble like the lies and burfers. Sound the alarms and blow the trumpets. No time to get worried, cause the work's not done yet.
Yeshua HaMashiach, the rock in Jerusalem. Yeshua HaMashiach, calling on Yah. Yeshua HaMashiach, the rock in Jerusalem. Yeshua HaMashiach, calling on Yah.
We're in Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem.
Shalom, and bless the Comforter through Yeshua HaMashiach. Welcome back to the Sons of Promise, House of Yehudah broadcast, brought to you by the sanctified and sanctioned body of the Culture Center of NCCI. My name is Brother Yohanan Yosef ben Yehuda Israel, and I'll be covering the Standard Bearers News of Note. In this segment, we'll deal with current events that show us prophecy is being fulfilled. Reference Revelations chapter 6, Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51, Revelation chapters 18, and Revelation chapters 13 and 17. Our first article from au.ibtimes.com, U.S. versus Russia. America remains world's mightiest army, but Vladimir Putin boasts of clear nuclear edge. If a shooting war erupts between the United States and Russia anytime soon, the numbers say that America will win overwhelmingly. That is, if the skirmishes are confined on conventional warfare. However, it will be a different story in a case of a nuclear World War III. Using the Global Firepower Index, 3 notable advantages of U.S. President Barack Obama, if he chooses to shoot it out with Putin, are in the personal, air power, and sea authority departments. Around 1.4 million active U.S. service members are at Obama's disposal, facing off with Putin's combat-ready 766,000 Russian troops. When it comes to tank showdown, the Kremlin is always ready to roll out 15,000 units that can barrel through the wall of 8,000 plus tanks that the White House can muster in the event the two would engage in an armor face-off. Russia, in fact, leads any military in the world in this respect. The same index somehow confirmed the earlier reports that in a nuclear duel, Putin will theoretically get the better of Obama, as the Russian leader can readily deploy 8,484 nuclear warheads, arrayed against America's 7,506, in a push of a button. And if strategy counts, as it should be, Russia is definitely on a warpath as it continues to modernize its military arsenal, that its searing hot defense spending could soon overtake that of the U.S. $612 billion Pentagon budget. Our next article, also from au.ibtimes.com, Russia downplays nuclear war. U.S. insists, citing dual missiles movement over Crimea. Russia had downplayed fears and speculations about a looming nuclear attack against the United States and its ally countries by dropping a provision of an anticipatory nuclear strike against potential enemy from its military doctrine. The new draft of the country's military doctrine would not include a stipulation for preemptive nuclear war, unnamed sources from Russia's defense ministry revealed. Preemptive war pertains to an attack initiated on the basis of unquestionable evidence that an attack from potential enemy is imminent, according to its dictionary meaning. Article 198 of Russia's revised military doctrine would not have a reservation for preemptive nuclear strikes on potential enemy, sources said. The document is very precise on the conditions under which Russia can use the nuclear weapons, an unnamed defense official said, as reported by RT. The nuclear attack from Russia would only become possible if the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Russian Federation are under threat, the official made clear. The same stipulation was also stated in Russia's military doctrine approved in 2010. The Russian Federation would only use nuclear weapons as retaliation to strikes with nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction on its territory or on the territory of its allies. The approved 2010 doctrine stated, the final decision whether to retaliate to a nuclear strike from an energy belongs to the president. Jeremiah chapter 50 verses 41 through 43 states, behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel, and will not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon horses, every one put in array, like a man to the battle against you, O daughter of Babylon. The king of Babylon hath heard the report of them, and his hands waxed feeble. Anguish took hold of him, and pains of a woman in travail. We will now return to our discussion of the resurrection of the dry bones in the valley. Shalom, and bless the Comforter through Yahshua HaMashiach.
Shalom, and bless the Comforter, the Yahshua.
Shalom.
Welcome back to our discussion of the resurrection of the dry bones in the valley. Now, my brother Leazar, can you pick it up for us here in the discussion?
Sure, my brother. Yahweh's love for the house of Israel. Yahweh loves all of the children of Israel. Even though Yahweh has given Judah a role of authority, the house of Israel is still special unto him. Let's hear Yahweh's love for the house of Israel in Hosea chapter 14, verse 1 through 9. Verse 1. O house of Israel, return unto Yahweh thy help, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words, and turn to Yahweh. Say unto him, take away all iniquity, and receive us graciously. So will we render the calves of our lips. Asher shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, you are our gods. For in thee the fatherless findeth mercy. I will heal thy backsliding. I will love them freely, for mine anger is turned away from him. I will be as the dew unto the house of Israel. He shall grow as the lily, and cast forth his roots as Lebanon. His branches shall spread, and his beauty shall be as the olive tree, and his smell as Lebanon. So we can see that Lebanon is another city that is associated with the house of Israel, being in the northern kingdom, along with Bethel, Shiloh, Shechem, and Samaria. They that dwell under his shadow shall return. They shall revive as the corn and grow as the vine. The scent thereof shall be as the wine of Lebanon. Ephraim shall say, what have I to do any more with idols? I have heard him and observed him. I am like a green fir tree. From me is thy fruit found. Who is wise? And he shall understand these things. Prudent, and he shall know them. For the ways of Yahweh are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressors shall fall therein. Again, in Hosea chapter 13, verse 12, states, the iniquity of Ephraim is bound up, his sin is hid.
Now let's go and read Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 1, verses 4 through 14, and also verses 18 through 21. Verse 1 states, at the same time, saith Yahweh, will I be the El of all the families of the house of Israel, and they shall be my people. Verse 4, Again I will build thee, and thou shalt be built, O virgin of Israel, or Ephraim. Thou shalt again be adorned with thy tabrets, and shalt go forth in the dances of them that make merry. Thou shalt yet plant vines upon the mountains of Samaria. The planters shall plant, and shall eat them as common things. For there shall be a day that the watchmen upon the mount Ephraim shall cry, Arise ye, and let us go up to Zion unto Yahweh our El. For thus saith Yahweh, Sing with gladness for Yaakov, and shout among the chief of the nations. Publish you, praise you, and say, O Yahweh, save thy people, the remnant of the house of Israel. Behold, I will bring them from the north country, and gather them from the coasts of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and her that travaileth with child together. A great company shall return thither. They shall come with weeping, and with supplications will I lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of waters in a straight way, wherein they shall not stumble. For I am a father to the house of Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear the word of Yahweh, O you nations, and declare to the isles afar off, and say, He that scattered the house of Israel will gather him and keep him, as a shepherd doth his flock. For Yahweh hath redeemed Yaakov, and ransomed him from the hand of him that was stronger than he. Therefore they shall come and sing in the height of Zion, and shall flow together to the goodness of Yahweh, for wheat, and for wine, and for oil, and for the young of the flock, and of the herd. And their soul shall be as a water garden, and they shall not sorrow any more at all. Then shall the virgin rejoice and dance, both young men and old together. For I will turn their mourning into joy, and will comfort them, and make them rejoice from their sorrow. And I will satiate the soul of the priest with fatness, and my people shall be satisfied with my goodness, saith Yahweh. Verse 18. I have surely heard Ephraim bemoaning himself thus, Thou hast chastised me, and I was chastised as a bullock, unaccustomed to the yoke. Turn thou me, and I shall be turned, for thou art Yahweh my El. Surely after that I was turned, I repented, and after that I was instructed, I smote upon my thigh. I was ashamed, yea, even confounded, because I did bear the reproach of my youth. Is Ephraim my dear son? Is he a pleasant child? For since I spake against him, I do earnestly remember him still. Therefore my bowels are troubled for him. I will surely have mercy upon him, saith Yahweh. Set thee up waymarks, make thee high heaps, set thine heart toward the highway, even the way which thou wentest. Turn again, O virgin of Israel, or Ephraim. Turn again to these thy cities. You can reference Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11, and verse 16, and see that this is the highway that will bring the house of Israel back to the land. And Isaiah chapter 60, verse 9 is showing how the house of Judah will be brought back to the land.
The house of Judah and the house of Israel in the New Testament. Let's go to the New Testament and read the account of the house of Judah and the house of Israel returning to Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, there were devout Judites out of every nation under heaven coming to Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Pentecost. Verse 1 states, And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues, like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling in Jerusalem the house of YAHUDAH, devout men out of every nation under heaven. Acts 2, verses 9 through 11 show the countries the house of Judah was coming from. Acts 2, verse 9 through 11 states, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers in Mesopotamia, and in Judea and Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, in Egypt and in the parts of Libya about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, the house of Yehudah and proselytes. Cretes and Arabians, we do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of Yisrael.
Now pay close attention to who Cephas, who is of the house of David, is addressing in verse 14. And it states, But Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and said unto them, You men of Judea, and all you that dwell at Jerusalem, be this known unto you, and hearken to my words. First, Cephas addressed the men of Judea, and then he addressed the other people that dwelt in Jerusalem, which was of the house of Israel. Acts 2, verse 22 confirms this, and it states, You men of Israel, hear these words, Yeshua of Nazareth, a man approved of Yahweh among you by miracles and wonders and signs which Yahweh did by him in the midst of you, as you yourself also know. Let's pick this up at Acts chapter 2, verse 34 through 36. Verse 34. For David is not ascended into the heavens, but he said himself, Yahweh said unto my Adonai, Sit thou on my right hand, until I make thy foes thy footstool. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know assuredly that Yahweh hath made the same Yeshua whom you have crucified, both Adonai and Mashiach. He said, Let all the house of Israel know assuredly. So we see Cephas is revealing Yeshua as Yeshua HaMashiach to the house of Israel at the Feast of Pentecost.
The house of Israel and the Great Tribulation. As America is being currently destroyed, reference Isaiah chapter 47 and Revelation chapter 8, verses 7 through 13, chapter 16, verses 1 through 9, also Revelation chapter 18, and Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51. Europe will soon anoint the last Caesar or king, who will rule the world for 3.5 years through the power of the dragon or Lucifer, after the destruction of America. Revelation chapter 13, verses 4 through 5 states, And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who was able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. During the Great Tribulation period, which is the last 3.5 years before Yahshua returns to the earth, reference Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, the house of Judah will be in the wilderness, reference Revelation chapter 12, verses 5 through 17, Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 33 through 38, and Hosea chapter 2, verses 14 through 23, but they will be in a place of safety, reference Isaiah chapter 16, chapter 35, Psalm 91, and also Psalm 107, verses 33 through 43. Isaiah chapter 32, verses 50 through 20, confirms this by saying, verse 15 states, Until the Spirit be poured upon us from on high, and the wilderness be a fruitful field, and the fruitful field be counted for a forest. Then judgment shall dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness remain in the fruitful field. And the work of righteousness shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness and assurance forever. And my people shall dwell in a peaceable habitation, and in sure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. When it shall hail, coming down in the forest, and the city shall be low in a low place. Blessed are you that sow beside all waters, that send forth thither the feet of the ox and the ass.
However, the house of Israel will have to go through the Great Tribulation. Let's hear what our Adonai King Yahshua had to say concerning this matter. Matthew chapter 24, verses 21 through 22 states, For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7 states, Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So it has already been prophesied that the house of Israel will be delivered out of this dreadful trouble. Let's confirm this by going to Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 states, And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book.
It is during this great trial of fire that the house of Israel and the nations will wash their robes in the blood of the Lamb Yeshua, therefore earning their salvation. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9 through 10 and 14 states, After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our El, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. And I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. After the great tribulation period, Yeshua will return to the earth to save the house of Judah from the armies that are coming down to Jerusalem. Reference Zechariah chapter 10, chapter 12, and chapter 14. Then it is time for the house of Israel to return to their land, having their captivity turned back, and finally the two houses become one stick again, as the children of Israel became one under the new covenant. Reference Ezekiel chapter 37, chapter 39, and Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31 through 38, and Hebrews chapter 8.
Let's go to Amos chapter 9, verses 14 and 15, to hear what the prophet had to say concerning this matter. If you pay attention, you will see some of the things the house of Israel will be doing when they return. Verse 14 states, And I will bring again the captivity of my people of the house of Israel, and it shall build the waste cities, and inhabit them, and it shall plant vineyards, and drink the wine thereof. It shall also make gardens, and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land, and it shall no more be pulled up out of the land which I have given them, saith Yahweh thy El. Again, let's go to the prophet Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 1 through 2, and witness the return and the role of the house of Israel when they get back to the land. Isaiah 14, verse 1 states, For Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose the house of Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and it shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Now when you hear the house of Jacob, or Jacob, it is dealing with all 12 tribes, or the children of Israel. Verse 2, And the people shall take them, and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of Yahweh for servants and handmaids. And it shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and it shall rule over their oppressors. In conclusion, let's go witness the house of Israel and the house of Judah returning to the land to receive their inheritance as one, as we see in Ezekiel chapter 37. Now in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 3, it states, For lo, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will bring into captivity my people, Israel and Yahudah, saith Yahweh, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. Also in Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. And verse 17 states, At that time they shall call Jerusalem the throne of Yahweh, and all the nations shall be gathered unto it, to the name of Yahweh, to Jerusalem. Neither shall they walk any more after the imagination of their evil heart. In those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given for inheritance unto your fathers. On behalf of the saints, we would like to thank you for tuning in to our discussion. We are located at 3711 North Decatur Road, Suite 104, in Decatur, Georgia, 30032. And we are led by beloved Elder Priest, Elder Isaias Ben Yehuda, Israel, who can be contacted at 404-849-8979. Also, our email address is contactsbocc@gmail.com. And coming up next, we'll be playing a commentary from our Prince Elder Priest Yaakov Ben Israel. Shalom, and bless the Comforter through Yahshua.
YAHUDAH!
No, we read that word that he was going to plead, right? Well, we got a different understanding of pleading. See, Yahweh does not beg or entreat man. See, but to plead is to separate and fight against unto death. From the time Yeshua began to lay the foundation in the daughter of Babylon, many were called, and Elohim pleaded by destroying those who never left or returned to their own understandings. These are those given knowledge and works who strive and make and make it to the wilderness. These are three or the four types of seeds sown by the sower of Israel. The word says that to be chosen, you must be rooted in the church and grow in grace and bring forth fruit that pleases and profits the Almighty of Israel, fruit that is ready for true repentance. Repentance that they should walk in newness of life to be born of the Spirit. This way, we truly know that Yeshua, our Elohim, walks among the saints, cleansing the thoughts of the heart and giving those redeemed power and strength to keep their holy covenants and to pay the vows that we owe. Jake don't like obedience, and Jake don't like paying vows. Who the meek and the poor among men is what? Poor in spirit. They shall rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. When the scripture said Moses was the most meek man in all the earth, that didn't mean that he was afraid of everything and so forth. That's not what it meant. What it meant was that he obeyed his instructions. I mean, he stood in the breach when he had to. He knew what to do when it had to be done. Mm-hmm. You have to learn how to keep the wrath of the God of Israel from visiting people, but people don't see that. See, people think they smart. People think they be getting away with stuff, and somebody always standing in the breach to keep the wrath of Yahweh from them. Now, what's going to happen when that person move out the breach? Go ahead and read, brother. But see, everybody think, well, I can do this on my own. If you could have did this on your own, then you wouldn't have no need of me standing up here today. You wouldn't have no need to even come to the congregation ever. The Messiah is coming back to save his church, not individuals. Yeah.
Shalom. Shalom, and bless the Comforter through Yahshua HaMashiach. Welcome back to the Standard Bearers News of Note. Our next article from globalresearch.ca. U.S. new Cold War policy has backfired and created its worst nightmare, shift in trade patterns and military alliances. The world's geopolitics, major trade patterns, and military alliances have changed radically in the past month. Russia has reoriented its gas and oil trade and also its trade in military technology away from Europe toward Eurasia. The result is the opposite of America's hope for the past half century of dividing and conquering Eurasia, setting Russia against China, isolating Iran, and preventing India, the Near East, and other Asian countries from joining together to create an alternative to the US dollar area. Germany's leading politicians, diplomats, and cultural celebrities wrote an open letter to Angela Merkel protesting her pro-US, anti-Russian policy. By overplaying its hand, the United States is in danger of driving Europe out of the US economic orbit. Turkey already is moving out of the European orbit by turning to Russia for its energy needs. Iran also has moved into an alliance with Russia. Instead of breaking up the BRICS, the dollar area is coming undone. President Putin is going to India to negotiate a gas and arms deal. He was in Turkey diverting what was to be the South Stream pipeline away from southern Europe to Turkey. And Turkey is becoming an associate of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, integrating the BRICS in a defensive alliance against the United States. Now that it is obvious that it has no chance of joining the EU. A few months earlier, Russia announced the largest oil and gas trade and pipeline investment ever with China, along with a transfer of missile defense technology. Our next article from thetrumpet.com. Pope Francis unifying the church and state. On November 25th, Pope Francis became the first pontiff in nearly 30 years to visit the European Parliament. Pope John Paul II was the last pope to address the Parliament in what he described as a special moment in the history of this continent. His ecstatic visit in 1988 came as communism was crumbling in Eastern Europe, providing a great opportunity for Europe to unite. Pope Francis, not so jubilant on his recent visit, delivered a somber message to the European Parliament. 2 weeks earlier, the continent had celebrated the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. That event has become the symbol of European unifying. But Pope Francis believes the continent has not done enough. The Pope's comments should send shivers down the spines of history students. Most people don't realize the destruction caused throughout the history of the Catholic Church. Here is a modern Pope rallying the European continent to unite behind it and return to its glory days. 4 days after addressing the European Parliament, Pope Francis traveled to Turkey to visit the head of the Orthodox Church, Patriarch Bartholomew. On this trip, the Pope focused on improving relations between the two churches. There has been a great divide between the two churches since 1054, when the Eastern Orthodox Church split from the Roman Catholic Church over the authority of the Pope. The Catholic Church has held many empires together throughout history. Soon it will again provide the glue to unite a European superpower. Revelation chapters 13 verses 1 and 3 states, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. And I saw one of his head as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." This has been the Standard Bearers News of Note. Next, we'll have a narration from Prince Elder Yaakov ben Yisrael. Shalom, and bless the Comforter through Yahshua HaMashiach.
All the glory we can't even imagine has been bestowed upon Israel, the holy seed. This is why Yahshua was sent to redeem the children of the bride from bondage to sin and of this fleshly tabernacle. Although Jake gives the spirit the blues, we still hear the voice of his pleading within the secret chambers of our soul. It's the call of love. And this is love, that we keep Yahweh's will. This is why whatever position we take on the stumbling blocks that are cast before us, we still hear the voice of love pleading within the secret chambers of our souls. And as it says that righteousness is love, love makes us at peace with the Spirit. Being under the blood only redeems us from the sins that was past. This repentance is the first step of the journey to the wilderness, where the new covenant will be enjoined. It's where the saints will experience for the first time the true power of Yahweh our Elohim. It's where the mighty Israelite army of the Spirit that will retake our holy city will receive great power. This is why we hear the still small voice pleading in the secret chambers of the soul. But if we don't hear to obey the still small voice, it's because we have discovered ourselves into another lover. But be that as it may, only those with the heart of righteousness shall see the love of Yahweh our Elohim, for the mouth of Yahweh our loving Father has spoken it.
Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. We who are now colonizing this strange land called America, or the daughter of Babylon, are the direct descendants of the house of Yahudah, Yahweh's pleasant land. Our holy city, Jerusalem, the most precious land of all the earth, and the great temple of Yahweh were razed to the ground, and there was massive deportation of Yahudah, the so-called Negroes, into captivity into the daughter of Babylon. The great poetic book of Psalms written by King Dawid prophesied of this when he wrote, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion." This is also reminiscent of what happened when our captors brought us to America, who is referred to in the scriptures as the daughter of Babylon. For there they that carried us captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, "Sing us one of those songs of Zion." How shall we sing Yahweh's song in a strange land? Psalms chapter 137.